They called it the ocean's friend, but on that cursed night, the dolphin became her executioner, and Jessica's screams drowned beneath the waves of betrayal. The bond of trust shattered. For years, Jessica had devoted her life to the ocean and its fragile inhabitants. As a marine biologist, she was known not just for her research, but for her compassion. While others saw dolphins as subjects of study or entertainment, she saw them as companions, guardians of the sea, who deserved dignity and care. Among them was one she loved most, the sleek, silver-blue dolphin she named Cale. Cale had been more than just another rescue. When he was found entangled in a fisherman's net, it was Jessica who had fought to free him, staying up nights to nurse his wounds. She fed him by hand, whispered soft promises into the waves, and believed, foolishly, that a creature of the sea could feel loyalty the way a human does. Over the years, Cale became her pride, her partner, and, if she dared admit it, the closest thing she had to family. To Jessica, their bond was sacred. To Cale, it was something else entirely. The day of the public show was meant to be a celebration, a demonstration of the trust between human and dolphin. The stands were filled with children laughing, parents clapping, cameras flashing. Jessica stood at the pool's edge, her hand raised high, waiting for Cale to leap in a graceful arc as he always did. And he did. Oh, how he soared, sunlight glittering on his skin like silver fire. The crowd roared with awe. But what followed was not part of the routine. Cale did not glide back to the water with playful splashes. Instead, he circled her, faster and faster, a predator tracing its prey. Before she could sense danger, Cale lunged, his powerful jaws clamping around her arm, yanking her into the depths. Gasps turned into screams above the water, but Jessica heard nothing except the rush of bubbles and the frantic pounding of her heart. The dolphin she had trusted more than any human was dragging her down. The water pressed cold against her chest, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She thrashed, trying to break free, but Cale's strength was merciless. He pulled her deeper, deeper, as though he meant to return her to the same ocean where he had once nearly died. The panic clawed at her throat, but worse than fear was the realization burning in her mind. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't instinct. This was betrayal. She had saved him, loved him, and he chose to repay her with death. By the time rescuers dove in and hauled her back to the surface, Jessica's body was broken, arms torn, ribs bruised, breath stolen. But her spirit, though battered, did not shatter. She coughed up seawater and blood, and as she lay on the deck, hearing the dolphins' mocking chirps echo across the pool, something inside her shifted. It was no longer love, no longer trust, only fire. In the days that followed, the world whispered excuses. Animals are unpredictable. Dolphins act on instinct. It wasn't personal. But Jessica knew better. She had seen something in Cale's eyes as he dragged her beneath the water. Not wild instinct, but cold decision. He had chosen betrayal. He had tasted her helplessness. And he had enjoyed it. Betrayal burns deeper than wounds, and hers would never heal. Every scar on her arm was a reminder. Every night terror a whisper of vengeance. She had given her life to the sea, and the sea had spat in her face. So Jessica began to plan. Her research took on a darker turn, no longer about preservation, but power. She studied toxins that paralyzed without killing, frequencies that disrupted dolphin communication, cages designed not to hold but to punish. And every sleepless night, she whispered Cale's name into the dark, like a curse, like a vow. If trust could be shattered, it could also be avenged. And when the day came, the world would not remember Jessica as the woman betrayed by a dolphin. They would remember her as the woman who made the ocean itself bleed. Jessica's wounds had barely begun to heal when the rumors started. At first, she dismissed them as gossip born from fear. People always sought meaning in chaos, weaving myths to explain the unexplainable. But soon, the whispers grew louder, darker. The dolphin wasn't acting alone, a fisherman told her one night, his voice heavy with dread. The ocean, it remembers. It punishes. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the man's eyes were not the eyes of someone sharing a tale. They were the eyes of a survivor, haunted, scarred, and convinced of something terrible. He spoke of sailors who vanished without a trace, ships that sank under calm skies, and shadows that moved beneath the waves like a gathering army. The ocean had a memory, and it had a pact. Jessica couldn't ignore what came next. In the weeks after her attack, she found herself plagued by dreams. Not mere nightmares, but visions. She saw faces of sailors long drowned, their eyes hollow, their mouths whispering through black water. They circled her, pointing toward the dolphin, toward Cale. Their voices blended into one, hissing through her skull. It was no accident. You were chosen. She woke screaming, her bedsheets damp with sweat, her hands clawing at her own throat as though the sea itself still held her. The more she tried to reason with herself, the more the world resisted reason. Strange things began to happen. Birds avoided her balcony, circling overhead but never landing. Her home, once filled with the comforting scent of salt and sea air, now reeked of brine, as though the ocean had crept into her very walls. And every time she closed her eyes, she heard the faint clicks and whistles of dolphins in her ears, except they weren't playful anymore. They sounded like mocking laughter. Soon, she came across records, old, weathered journals left behind by sailors who had docked in the coastal town she worked in. The entries chilled her, stories of dolphins guiding ships into storms, whales dragging vessels into the abyss, and shadows in the waves that demanded sacrifice. A pattern emerged, carved across centuries. Whenever humans drew too close, whenever the sea was disturbed, the ocean retaliated. The dolphins were not pets, not companions. They were soldiers, messengers, executioners. Cale had not betrayed her out of instinct. He had obeyed. The realization twisted something deep inside Jessica. She had spent her life protecting the ocean, defending it against human greed. And this was her reward? To be marked, attacked, and dragged into the depths by the very creature she saved? No, this wasn't justice. This was cruelty. Her accident, as the newspapers called it, was nothing of the sort. It was an orchestration, a warning, a message written in water and blood. Jessica began to piece together fragments of the pact. The drowned whispered in her dreams. The journals confirmed what she feared, and the wounds on her arm burned whenever she came near the sea, as if the salt still claimed her. But the pact had made one mistake. It had left her alive. If the ocean wanted her silence, it should have finished the job. Instead, it had created something it never expected, an enemy who understood its secrets. Jessica no longer saw herself as a victim. She was marked, yes, but not broken. And if the ocean had a pact, then she would forge one of her own. Not with the drowned, not with the sailors, not with the whispers of the deep. Her pact would be with vengeance. Cale had delivered the message, but Jessica would be the one to return it, written in fire, steel, and blood, until even the ocean remembered her name. Jessica's body was supposed to be broken, her spirit swallowed by the ocean's teeth. The doctors had told her recovery would take months, perhaps years. But something inside her was changing, something faster, darker, and unexplainable. She began to heal too quickly. Flesh that had been shredded by Cale's bite knitted together in days, leaving behind scars that looked less like wounds and more like marks carved by some ancient hand. Her skin turned pale, drained of its sun-warmed glow, and a faint shimmer clung to her at night, as though seawater still clung to her veins. She stopped attending her checkups. She stopped answering calls. She vanished. Days later, the sightings began. Tourists strolling the moonlit beaches swore they saw her. A lone figure wandering the shore barefoot, white dress soaked with seawater, though no tide had touched her. They described her hair clinging damply to her skin, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark like deep-sea creatures that lured prey with light. Some whispered she was not alive anymore. Others insisted she was something worse. Children cried that they saw her staring at the ocean, unmoving for hours, whispering words in a language no one understood. Fishermen claimed they found dead gulls scattered along the sand where she walked, their feathers crusted with salt as though drowned in invisible waves. One diver, drunk and trembling, confessed to seeing her far offshore, standing on the water's surface for the briefest moment before the waves swallowed her. To the locals, Jessica was no longer the marine biologist who had once protected the dolphins. She had become a phantom, a revenant, a warning. But those who saw her face closely told a darker story. Her eyes no longer held warmth. They shimmered with fury, reflecting the same cold hunger as the sea itself. Yet unlike the ocean, her rage was not patient, not eternal. It was urgent, burning, desperate for retribution. The whisper spread. Jessica had died that day beneath the water, and what returned was not entirely human. And perhaps, in some way, they were right. Jessica herself felt the shift. Nights were no longer quiet. Her dreams were filled with drowned sailors clawing at her window, their hollow mouths chanting the same refrain. Take back what was taken. Drown what betrayed you. She awoke with salt crusting her lips and sand scattered across her sheets. Though she hadn't stepped outside, her body was changing too. When she entered the water now, it welcomed her. The cold no longer bit at her skin. The currents no longer resisted. She could hold her breath far longer than before, her lungs aching less with each dive. The ocean whispered to her like a conspirator, as though recognizing something in her it had once tried to destroy. But Jessica had no intention of becoming its ally. She knew what she had become, a weapon forged by betrayal, neither fully of the land nor fully of the sea. She was something new, something dangerous, and the one who had created her, the one who had dragged her beneath and left her for dead, was still out there. Cale. She could almost feel his presence in the waves, circling, waiting, mocking. The bond they once shared had curdled into venom, but it had not broken. She was tied to him now in ways neither of them could escape. And soon, he would see what he had created. The next time the dolphin surfaced, it would not be to drag her down. It would be to face what had risen from the deep. Jessica was no longer simply a survivor. She was vengeance incarnate. It began quietly. A single disappearance, written off as an accident. A junior trainer at the aquarium failed to return home after closing. They found his keys still on the dock, his shoes neatly placed by the water's edge. The police assumed he had slipped, drowned, and been claimed by the current. But when divers searched, they found no body, only deep, crescent-shaped gouges along the wooden pylons, as though something with teeth had scraped them deliberately. Then came the second. A wealthy patron known for sponsoring dolphin shows was found floating in the harbor, his face frozen in terror, his body bearing bite marks too precise to be the work of sharks. Witnesses swore they had seen a dolphin circling his yacht that night, its sleek back glistening under the moonlight. But the injuries told another story. These were not the random, chaotic tears of an animal. They were calculated, surgical. By the third disappearance, whispers had turned into fear. Every victim had something in common. They had profited from the suffering of sea creatures. Trainers who beat animals into performing tricks, businessmen who funded aquatic circuses, sailors who hunted without mercy. One by one, they were vanishing, leaving behind trails of salt, blood, and silence. And the strange part, the chilling part, was that the attacks bore the signature of dolphins, yet they were far too deliberate. The bodies showed signs of being dragged down, pinned, suffocated. Dolphins were intelligent, yes, but this was not intelligence. This was vengeance. The rumors grew. Some claimed Jessica had returned, no longer bound by human laws, but wielding the ocean itself as her blade. Others swore she was dead, and it was her ghost, haunting the waves, commanding the dolphins as her soldiers. Tourists whispered of seeing her standing waist-deep in the surf at midnight, her pale hand outstretched as shadows moved in the water around her, waiting for her signal. For those who knew her once, the truth was more terrifying. Jessica was alive, and she was no longer fighting for the sea. She was fighting with it. The change within her had grown. When she walked by the shore, dolphins surfaced and followed, their eyes fixed on her like worshippers on a prophet. Schools of fish moved in eerie synchronization, forming patterns that seemed to echo her thoughts. Even the waves obeyed, shifting and crashing in unnatural rhythm when her anger spiked. It was as if Cale's betrayal had unlocked something ancient within her, a tether between human rage and the ocean's primal force. And she was no longer holding back. Jessica's retribution was not wild or chaotic. It was strategic. She targeted those who had built empires on the broken bodies of sea life. One by one, they vanished beneath the waves. Their names filled headlines, their fates shrouded in fear. Police investigations turned desperate, but with every unanswered question, the legend grew. Some swore they saw her eyes glowing just beneath the surface, before each disappearance. Others claimed they heard dolphins crying out in the night, not with joy, but with fury, echoing through the harbors like a war cry. The sea had become her weapon, and Jessica wielded it with precision. Yet through it all, one presence lingered: Cale. Jessica felt him constantly, like a shadow at the edge of her vision. She knew he watched her, circling in the blackness of the deep, testing her, waiting. Their bond had twisted into something darker than hatred, deeper than love. It was an endless pull between predator and prey, betrayer and avenger. But this time, Jessica was no prey. The ocean itself bent to her wrath, and when she finally turned her vengeance toward Cale, the sea would not save him. It would deliver him. The storm arrived without warning. Thunder split the night sky. Lightning carved jagged scars across the horizon, and the sea rose in heaving, violent swells. To the terrified citizens huddled inland, it was just another tempest, cruel and merciless. But Jessica knew better. This storm was not natural. It was a summons. The dolphins had gathered near the harbor, their sleek forms darting in and out of the frothing waves like shadows. And among them was the one she had been waiting for: Cale. His silver body cut through the black water, his clicks echoing above the crashing surf like a challenge. The betrayer had returned. Jessica stepped onto the docks, rain lashing against her pale skin, her eyes burning with unnatural light. The ocean didn't resist her anymore. It pulsed with her heartbeat, roared with her fury. She raised her hand, and the waves swelled higher, slamming against the pier in violent bursts. Around her, dolphins circled like soldiers awaiting orders, but her focus was on one alone: Cale. Their eyes met across the churning sea. Once, that gaze had been a bond of trust, a silent promise of loyalty. Now it was venom. Betrayal stared at revenge, and the world held its breath. With a shriek of wind and thunder, the battle began. Cale lunged from the water, his body a missile of muscle and rage. Jessica didn't flinch. The waves lifted her, carrying her onto the surface as though the ocean itself held her aloft. When his jaws snapped shut where her arm had been, she struck back, not with fists, but with the sea. A wall of water rose at her command, slamming Cale sideways, sending him crashing against the storm-lashed dock. But he was not just a dolphin anymore. He was the ocean's weapon, its chosen executioner. With terrifying speed, he surged again, his powerful tail cleaving the waves, his teeth gleaming with murderous intent. He struck her mid-chest, dragging her beneath the water, just as he had on the day of betrayal. Only this time, Jessica did not choke. The sea welcomed her. Salt filled her lungs without suffocating. Currents wrapped around her body like armor. Her eyes glowed brighter in the abyss, and she felt herself transforming fully into the creature the ocean had forged from her broken soul. She grasped Cale's jaw, forcing it open with strength no human should possess. His squeals echoed like screams through the deep, and for the first time, fear flickered in his black eyes. Above them, lightning struck the waves, illuminating a vision that would haunt every witness forever. Jessica, pale and glowing, grappling with the dolphin in a storm-lit sea. Neither woman nor beast, but something caught in between. She whispered through the water, her voice carried by the current itself. "You chose betrayal, Cale. I choose revenge." The dolphins that had once circled as his allies now stilled, caught between fear and awe. The tide itself shifted, no longer his to command. The sea had a new master. With a final surge, Jessica drove Cale into the depths, deeper and deeper, until the crushing weight of the ocean silenced his thrashing. His body went limp, swallowed by the abyss, leaving only a trail of blood blooming through the water like a crimson scar. When Jessica rose from the waves, the storm broke. The rain ceased, the thunder rolled into silence, and the ocean calmed as though exhaling relief. She walked ashore, her white dress clinging to her body, her hair dripping with seawater and blood. Those who dared to watch swore her eyes still glowed, filled not with mercy, but with the cold fury of the sea itself. From that night on, her name was no longer whispered with pity, but with dread. Sailors told her story in hushed voices, the woman betrayed by the ocean, who returned not as victim but as vengeance incarnate. Some claimed she vanished into the sea, becoming its dark queen. Others believed she still walked the shores, hunting those who dared to exploit the creatures of the deep. But all agreed on one thing. Wherever the waves roared loudest, wherever betrayal festered in salt and blood, Jessica would be there. Not human, not monster, a legend,